What's going on, YouTube? Thanks for tuning into the channel. It's your boy Devin Coates. As promised, I'm gonna finish these mastery vids. I know in the last favorite book of all time. I know in the last one I said I wasn't sure what I was gonna do, if I was gonna split them up. I'm just gonna do section by section. It's just the easiest in terms of time. I want to keep these pretty time bound. So let's just jump in. So part 3, absorb the master's power and the mentor dynamic. It starts out with the alchemy of knowledge. Michael Faraday, 1791 to 1867. So just to start off, Michael Faraday was very poor growing up. He was not in the elite class, but he was raised with a religion. It was like a Christian religion, but where they saw God in everything. And this kind of led him to have a super active mind. And he was always like looking for like the life or the God in everything. And basically, he's always like running around, and eventually he finds himself in a bookstore. So he's reading all these books. The shopkeeper, Rabau, he basically takes a liking to the kid. He's like, oh man, like I've never seen a kid this interested. And at that time, you know, you had to pretty much get ready to work in the workforce. So he takes him under and is like, do you want to apprentice for me, or do you want to like apprentice? I think his dad was like a blacksmith or something. So he apprentices at the book shop. It's a little bit of a step up. Does his apprenticeship there. The bookkeeper lets him read all these books. He eventually reads this one book on electromagnetism, and then he realizes, this is my calling, this is what I love, I'm super interested in electromagnetism. And this is really where I just bring up the religion again, was like he was so in love with the idea of things you couldn't see, like God being in everything. So this outside force was amazing to him. So he's reading that book, and then he reads this other book. It's like this enlightenment book about how to improve your lot in life. It's basically a self-development book from back in the day. And really what this book is saying is that if you want to get good at anything, you have to study everything. You got to do more than just take notes. You have to recreate the notes, do your own experiments. So he's going through all these scientific books, recreating the experiments. The bookkeeper allows him to do it in the back. He's building these experiments in the back. And he's getting pretty good at it. And he takes these notes, meticulous notes on everything. Basically, a scientist actually comes in to the bookstores looking at stuff, and then he sees the notes because the bookkeeper shows it to him, and he's like, he's super impressed with all these notes. He's like, who wrote this? He's like, this kid, you know, Michael. He's like writing them. He's like, oh, word. Let's invite him to this this big event, this big show. So he goes to the show. He sees his favorite scientist, who is Davy. And Davy is the crazy scientist at the time. And you have to think about the time period we're in. This is late 1700s, early 1800s. So there isn't the internet. There's not TV. There's like, I don't even know if there's fucking radio, really. Basically, these people that were scientists are the rock stars of their time, and this guy had a flair into being kind of like flashy, explosions, almost hurting himself. So to watch this guy, he falls in love, he takes even more notes, he recreates all the experiments, and he basically realized he's at a turning point where like basically he either needs to get a scientist job or he needs to become a bookkeeper. His apprenticeship is ending. He's not of the elite class, so he knows he needs kind of a cosign to get in. Things were very socially stratified at that point. So he needs a cosign. He keeps writing to that same department, the guy that invited him, the place where Davy's at. Finally, he catches a break. Davy gets hurt. He needs an assistant to come in and take notes. Scientist recommends Michael Faraday. He gets to do it for Davy. He does that for a short stint. Nothing really comes of it. He goes home. Keeps writing papers. He does not give up. He keeps writing letters. Please let me in. Please let me in. Finally, somebody gets fired. His assistant gets fired for insubordination. Opening happens for Michael Faraday. He's not doing the most glamorous stuff, but he's happy about it. He gets to absorb the thinking of Davy. He's cleaning out the test tubes, doing things of that sort, just kind of being a fly on the wall and a sponge at the same time, absorbing all of the knowledge. And eventually gets to the point where, you know, after 8 years, he's like, you know, I feel like I've surpassed Davy. One thing I do want to say is that he really was into his level of thinking. I remember there was this story about how he basically found out that diamonds are made of carbon, just like coal, and it's actually the conditions of the environment that cause the difference, not a different substance in itself. And how he used the process of elimination of basically putting a diamond in a container and magnifying it until it burnt all the way out into carbon, which proved that carbon was all that it was made of. And he loved that idea of thinking, and he does this he basically does an experiment to find out that electromagnetism moves in a spiral form with a cork and a screw and a magnet, and it basically showed how it, in like mercury or something, and it showed how it spun around. But long story short, he makes this finding, and it was kind of wishy-washy whether, you know, Davy and this other guy Wallace were involved in it. And basically he publishes it without talking to them first, and it causes a rift. Davy and Wallace are a little bit upset. They're like, yo, like, we were all part of this, how come we weren't included? Michael Faraday has a meeting with both Wallace and Davy. He goes to Wallace, explains himself. He's like, this is how I came to it. It was all my issues. Please forgive me. I should have had the conversation with you first. Wallace is like, we're good. He goes to Davy with the same thing. Davy's like, nah, bro, like, you stole my work. I did this. I made you who you are. Long story short, they do not have a great split. It's terrible. It never works. To the day that Davy dies, he's constantly trying to demean him, trying to tell people that he's not a real scientist, and spreading all these kinds of rumors. But basically at this point, Michael Faraday has already established himself. He already has a great finding under his belt that he has published to the masses. So Davy can't do anything. So in the end, he really followed the best way of absorbing the mentor's dynamic. So one, he followed his calling, he followed his inclinations. That's what got him into the bookstore. This is one of my favorite stories too, by the way. That's what gets him into the bookstore. So he's reading, he finally finds electromagnetism, he finds what he loves, then he finds a self-development book, and he just kind of keeps letting his inclinations drive him, and he puts all the work in to do all these experiments. He has the ability to go to the science. He eventually gets to working with Davy, and then when he's with Davy, he's a sponge on the wall. He takes the step back for 8 years. He takes he spends his tutelage under him, and he learns what he needs to learn. But he was also bold enough when he got to that point to make that split, when he was like, you know, at this point I've gained all the knowledge, I'm not getting any younger, I need to start producing shit on my own. And he produces the shit on his own. So those are the real takeaways, is that you need to follow those inclinations, you need to absorb your mentor for the time being, but you need to be bold when you need to make that split. So that is the overarching story that explains this chapter. The next part really talks about strategies for deepening the mentor dynamic. So the first one is choose a mentor according to your needs and inclinations. Kind of something similar to what I said. So there's a couple stories, but Yoki Matsuoka I think is the best story that exemplifies this. So basically, she was an athlete in Japan, but was never really like good enough to be like that Olympic level. So she moves to America. I think she goes to MIT, and she basically gets introduced to robotics. And the mentor she chooses is kind of a rebel. She was always kind of a rebel. She was more tomboyish than the other girls, and she also had a different way of thinking. Since she played a lot of sports, she kind of came from more of a anatomical, biological type of perspective rather than a pure robotics perspective, a lot of the other people. So in terms of her thinking, it was all revolutionary. And also in terms of her instructor, he was kind of the bad boy of the department. So she chose him because he had kind of her type of flair. And this is really important because you need somebody that is going to get to you, somebody that's going to be able to give that information to you in a way that you can digest it, that you resonate with. You don't want to be around somebody that's not like you, because you're going to just have too much budding, and it's going to be very hard to absorb it and kind of get those accelerated returns that are constantly being spoke about in this book. The next one is gaze deep into the mentor's mirror. And the story that's used for this is Hakuin Zenji. So he actually is really the person who revived Zen Buddhism in Japan. Basically, his story is that at a very young age, he was really weird. He was always into like super religious stuff, and he basically traveled the world looking for enlightenment, and he'd go to these different Buddhist like type of monastery places, these Buddhist temples and shit. And basically he would go there, and he was looking for a master that had reached enlightenment. The only problem was he felt like everybody was too passive, and that was like a big thing that he kind of changed. Was like, Buddhism is not supposed to be super passive. Even in the West, there's this strong passive vibe that's around today. That like that's kind of the thing he was fighting. It's not like anybody can be Buddhist. You just sit there and stare at the wall. It's like, no, you got to really do thinking. You really got to put yourself through real suffering to really gain that. Like, and it's not like just a moment kind of thing. So he eventually finds this one guy, Shoju, and Shoju basically is way different. He's like smacking him in the face. He asks them a question and just comes and twists their nose like real hard, like it feels like it's falling off, and makes them do like weird stuff that's just super painful, and asks them all these like crazy riddles that they don't understand. And at one point he has like a conversation with Shoji. He's like, why do you do this? Why are you so mean? He's like, the reason I'm so hard on you is because enlightenment is not a moment like everybody else thinks. Enlightenment is it is ongoing, and you have to keep learning. You can't think you know everything. You don't know everything. And this was really important. This is a real important moment in his life. So he goes through his tutelage under Shoju for a while, and then he leaves, and he kind of goes back on his wandering quest, and he meets all these other Buddhists, and again, they're passive. They're not pushing him. They're not really like pushing anybody to be at a different level. It's like you walk in, you're there. If you just are quiet and just sit around all day, you've reached it. And basically he gets to the point where he realizes that, you know, Shoju was the only real mentor he ever had, the only real person that ever pushed him to reach enlightenment. He finally got it. He went back to go tell him, and he was actually dead, if I remember correctly in the story. And he was actually dead, and Hakuin actually just takes Shoju's teachings and basically revives Buddhism. But the main takeaway here is that you need a mentor that's going to give it to you straight, a mentor that's going to push you. You can't just have somebody that's just going to be relaxed, letting you just sit around not doing anything. You want to be pushed to those next levels if you really want to reach mastery, the upper echelon of understanding a subject. The next one is actually transfigure their ideas, and the person here is Glenn Gould. And basically he was a kid that was like a piano prodigy. His parents knew off the rip that he was going to be a piano prodigy. And he had a professional piano player, Guerrero, teaching him. And he would teach him stuff like different ways to arch your back, and to like not, I think it was like to not move. You didn't want to move your elbows. You want to just move you want to move your whole upper body when you play. You don't want to move your arms. You want to keep them stationary, and that's how you get more power in the strokes. And you know, Gold would be like, yo, I don't really like that as a kid. He was always butting heads. He's like, you know, I think you should actually picture the piece first in your head and then play it, and then try to play it. Don't just read the paper. And he goes, I don't like doing that. And you give him all these different stylistic things that he would just be like, I don't like it. Eventually, as he reached his later teen years, he broke off for the best of both of them. Guerrero was like, I can't deal with this guy. Gould's like, I cannot learn under this guy. And basically he becomes a prolific piano player. But the crazy thing is, when the critics write for him, they're like, the way he has that hunch, it reminds me of Guerrero. He's not even moving his arms. And like other times, it's like it's like he pictures the whole piece is finished before he's playing it. And there's this instrument they talk about. It's like a harposcope, and that was another one where he's like, you know, play the piano as if you're playing the harposcope, and it's like, it sounds like he's playing the harposcope. And he basically created all these things. Basically he took everything he learned from his master, and I don't really agree with the whole, and this wasn't like the point, but like the whole thing where you like tell your master like, I don't agree with it, and then you end up using it. But basically he took all of his ideas and transfigured them and made them his own. And it was just very like, that's really what you want to do. You want to take it and that's kind of like what Bruce Lee always says. It's like, he says, it's like, absorb what's useful, discard the rest, and make it true, like make it your own. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but that's his quote, and that's really what he did. And if you want to reach that upper echelon of mastery, that is another thing that you need to make sure you do. This one is create a back and forth dynamic, and this is Freddie Roach. You know, if you guys know me, I'm a combat sport guy. I love Freddie Roach, one of the best trainers in the business. So basically, Freddie Roach was a fighter, but he didn't really make it. He was too emotional. So basically, after his career, he goes through his deep depression. He finds his way back to the gym, and it kind of almost like begrudgingly, like against his will, begrudgingly, he finds himself back at the gym. And he's working with Eddie Futch. Eddie Futch is a fucking legend in the training world of boxing. So he's working with, he goes back because Eddie Futch was his trainer, and he realized that Eddie Futch didn't have the bandwidth to coach all of the fighters. So what Freddie Roach did, he's like, yo, I'll kind of help out for free, and I'll coach some of these fighters. And now he's kind of getting himself back in the mode. He's getting himself back rejuvenated, And long story short, he realized that, like, you would tell somebody a game plan, and that was his big problem. Was like, he would know the game plan when he get in a fight. It's like Mike Tyson always says, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. It's like, once you get punched in the face, you get a little more emotional. Let's be honest. It's like, it's a different story when, you're just thinking it. So what he realized was the Cuban fighters would actually put mitts and have the fighter hit the mitts and be closer. So what Freddie Roach really started to do was he would actually create the whole game plan, mimic the fighter, and actually, use the mitts. And if you ever watch, like, current mitt work, like in this day and age, every fighter does that. They're doing the mitts and they're striking back at you, and it's like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, kind of thing. So it's like they're doing all that. So it kind of created this back and forth where, one, he's getting the ability, he can't fight anymore, but he's getting that ability to fight still and move around, And then also it's helping to teach and other people. So he's kind of even getting into something that's not even in the book, of being the mentor and kind of creating that back and forth dynamic. But what he did was he created a back and forth dynamic to mastering his craft, where he could get input from Manny Pacquiao, because that was mainly the person that he's working with. He would get that back and forth dynamic where he would kind of get to feel what he was doing and correct it, feel what he's doing and correct it. So it was like immediate feedback, and it was mentor-mentee, like back and forth, and it made it very easy. He was very teachable in terms of learning from Manny Pacquiao too, to become a better trainer. But he created that back and forth dynamic where that feedback is there, that relationship is there, and it helps get those accelerated returns that we were speaking of before. This one is really the reversal. So this is the Thomas Edison story. So I'm gonna make this one quick. So basically, Thomas Edison was not schooled. He didn't go to school for very long, but he always wanted to be a businessman. So he basically taught himself everything he knew. He basically read a lot of books. He became a businessman. He became very successful in his own right. But at the end of the day, this is not the advantageous route. This is the long way. You want to take the short way, the fast way. You want to cut the learning curve. And that's the whole point of the mentor relationship. And with Thomas Edison, he didn't have that privilege. So if you don't have that privilege, you need to take that mode. And even for myself, I feel like in some ways, that's where I'm going. Is like, I've tried to take some of these courses, but I'm not really getting FaceTime. And it kind of going back to this book, it kind of shows me some of the places where I feel like I failed. Was like, I didn't have the FaceTime, and I got to teach myself. I got to post these videos. I got to learn. I got to read. I got to watch videos on how to edit. I got to watch these other videos on how they're doing it until you get to the point where you find a mentor. But the whole goal, you want to find a mentor, because they cut the learning curve. They can show you mistakes that you wouldn't see. And basically, we all stand on the shoulders of giants, and that's where I'm going to end this here. We all stand on the shoulders of giants. I took calculus when I was 17, 18 years old, and if you go 500 years back, the smartest mathematician in the world, that'd be way smarter than me, knew less than what I knew at 17, 18, and I'm fucking around in class. So just know that. So you want a mentor. It's not, I think in our society, and speaking specifically to America, we're so individualistic. We don't like to feel like we need help, and we want to do it all on our own, but nobody did it on our own. Even for me, I'm shooting these videos. Well, I'm lucky I have fucking power to charge my camera. I'm lucky I have lights that I could just turn on, and nice plants, and I'm eating and I'm having a good time. But that's all for today. That is really number 3. Number 4 is on the way. That's going to be on social intelligence. But you guys know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, dislike. If you didn't like it, any feedback will do. It's your boy Devin Coates, new and improved, coming back. Gonna finish this up for you. Until next time, deuces.